Hello, Adam. I'm so excited to have you here with me today.
Hello, thanks very much for having me.
Very excited. It's been a while since we've had a fella on. It feels really bad that I always try and be a bit more gender diverse in my podcast guests, but you guys are far less likely to put your hat in the ring to have me pull your emotions apart.
Yes, yeah. And it does still feel that there's fewer of us, maybe, even if
Yeah,
it's balancing out over time.
I agree. I agree. Look, let's get started. Tell me, who are you? Where are you from? And where are you based now?
So I'm from the UK originally. I'm speaking to you from Kuala Lumpur, where we moved about 9 months ago. So my wife is a British diplomat in the Foreign Office, and so we've done this a few times now. This is the third time, and she is the High Commissioner to Malaysia, in the British Foreign Service, and this time round is the first time that we've done it with children. So we've got 5-year-old twin boys, and so a whole host of new challenges in being a trading spouse this time around compared to the past.
100%. Do you want to talk me through what's the bouncing around look like? Did you guys where did you guys get started? Did you guys meet in the UK? Were you one of those that have sort of met abroad elsewhere?
No, we met in the UK. We met in about 15 years ago at a music festival. So quite kind of randomly. Although by coincidence we were both UK civil servants at the time. I was working for our government domestically, and Elsa, my wife, was working for the Foreign Office but based in London. And we met in the July, and she said, interest of full disclosure, I'm moving to Pakistan in November, which was quite a big thing to process, but it obviously kind of like worked very well. We decided to make a go of it. So she moved to Pakistan. So that was her first posting overseas, was Islamabad, and I went to visit her there, and we did a bit of uh, London to Islamabad long distance, but inevitably it was kind of quite hard work. And so I applied for a transfer from my domestic department into the Foreign Office, and there weren't any jobs going in Islamabad, but there was one going in Kabul. So much to my mother's delight, upon meeting this new girl, I moved to Afghanistan, and we sort of did slightly less long distance just across the Khyber Pass from each other. So that was our first kind of experience of all of this.
Oh my god. I feel like that is a podcast episode in its own. It's hilarious. So how long did that setup last for?
So we did that. It was about 2 years, about a year and a half or 2 years, and obviously it was slightly different in that I wasn't a sort of trading spouse in the traditional sense. Then we were both working for the Foreign Service out there. We did about 18 months where Elsa was in Pakistan and I was in Afghanistan, and then for the last 6 months she was in Kabul as well. She kind of transferred over there. So we in total about 2 years, and then we moved back to London from there, and we had about 4 years back in London, which is where we got married. And
So
then
hang on, can I
the
stop you there? Can you tell
yeah,
me
yeah.
what years were you what year was that first move, like to the Islamabad move?
So she moved to Islamabad in late 2009, and I moved out to Kabul
Okay.
in early 2010.
Okay,
And
right.
then we moved back to the UK at the end of 2011.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
and then had yeah, it must have been about 3 years back in the UK. Got married, and then uh, her next posting came up, which was Brussels. So a lot calmer, or should have been a lot calmer. Politically, it was much less calmer because we ended up being in Brussels from 2014 to 2018, which was precisely the period that the UK decided to have a referendum on leaving the EU, renegotiated, had the referendum, and then started the process of leaving. So it ended up being politically a kind of incredibly interesting time to be there. But she did that. She was kind of chief of staff to the ambassador there. And I, by this point, had left the civil service, and I started getting more involved kind of directly in politics. And I ended up working in the European Parliament. I worked for a UK Labour, so centre left member of the European Parliament out there. So that was my first time kind of going out, as Elsa's husband, and that was the reason we were there, and kind of, finding a job out there for myself for the first time.
And how was that? Like, what was the sort of setup? Was there a bit of like a I'm assuming I've had a fair bit of interactions with different countries, sort of diplomatic or trade scenes throughout sort of Southeast Asia. But was it pretty easy? Sort of, did you almost slot into like a scene or a crowd? There was the other spouses and things. Like, what was that first experience in Brussels though?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in that sense, Brussels is quite unusual as well because we were, she was not posted to the British embassy to Belgium. It wasn't the kind of bilateral thing. It was the British embassy to the EU. So Brussels is this kind of incredibly multi kind of cultural and quite transitory city. I think it has its own challenges for the kind of permanent Belgian residents of Brussels, but actually there are constantly people kind of moving in, moving out, passing through from what was then the 28 member states of the EU. And so, yeah, you definitely did kind of slot in quite quickly that, there was a lot of people, a lot of work to be done in the city, I suppose, that was kind of familiar. And definitely both a kind of British expat network, but also a kind of more EU bubble expat network, I guess.
Mm. And I guess because you were there in a time pre-Brexit, you were able, like working wise, you could get you didn't need visas, I assume. You just apply for the job and get the job. And
yeah, exactly. And in fact, it was so that was true anyway. And then my job was working directly for the kind of EU institutions. So that came with its own sort of like package anyway. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of just going out there with my passport and my status then as an EU citizen, it was all kind of relatively straightforward.
Okay, so did you have a little stint back in the UK before you bounced again?
We did. So we came back in 2018. Elsa was pregnant as we moved back, and then our sons were born in London in December 2018, 3 months earlier than they were supposed to be born. So that was we thought we had about 3 months to settle back into the UK, and we ended up having 5 weeks before they were born. So that was obviously particularly kind of intense. And then for the whole from 2018 until late 2018 until last July, we were back in London, sort of setting up as a family. I was taking maternity leave. I took some paternity leave as well, and then, because as you can imagine, I think if you've spoken to lots of people from this sort of world before, the lead-in times to knowing that you're getting a job and knowing that you're moving are pretty long. So I think it was sort of spring 2022 Elsa applied for and got the Malaysia job. And so we knew we had about 15 months or so during which she was doing her language training and all of that kind of thing, where we knew that the next big move was going to be Kuala Lumpur, and it was going to be in summer 2023.
How interesting! Hang on, the language training. So like literally learning Bahasa before coming.
So she did 9 months of 5 days a week Bahasa training.
Wow!
In order to come out here, yeah.
Wow, is that the norm as far as in an ambassador? Well, is she high commissioner? High commissioner?
She's a high commissioner.
High commissioner. Is that a sort of expectation wherever you're getting shifted around the world?
I think most places. Definitely, I think that the UK government, I think, places a pretty big premium on its ambassadors and high commissioners being able to speak the language of where they're going. I mean, embarrassingly at the moment, I'd like to rectify this, but I speak almost no Bahasa. I speak less than my children, but because Kuala Lumpur is incredibly, international and English is spoken so brilliantly out here. But yeah, I think even if it's a city where you could get by with English, I think it's a kind of, it improves the quality of relationships, and I think shows a kind of respect to the host country.
100%. That's fabulous. I'm a bit actually embarrassed to say I've got no idea if Australia does anything like that. I've got no idea if our high commissioners and ambassadors and things can speak the local language. I think that I always just assume that it's always such a bonus if someone happens to know some of the language when they turn up in a place, because we are definitely not known for our great languages other than English being taught in primary and high schools in Australia is not really one of our strong points at all. Yeah, how interesting. I see. Okay, so you had that's quite a decent lead up as far as, so it wasn't one of those things like, okay, cool, you've got the posting, let's pack this stuff up and get out of here in 6 weeks turnaround.
No, exactly. We had a long time to kind of plan it, and that helped. And we'd been looking for that sort of timing if we were going to be able to make it work, partly because it meant that we moved out in the summer before our sons started primary school. So we were trying to avoid, if we could, a year of primary school back in the UK and then moving. We wanted to kind of do it like that, which did work well, which was good, although it certainly meant for them, for our sons, it was quite the kind of double whammy of like, bang, you're in a new country, bang, you've started school for the first time. So that was quite an adjustment, but I still think hopefully better than putting them kind of in and out of institutions unnecessarily if we didn't need to.
Yeah, look, I did that to mine. They're probably damaged and they'll hate me later. I've got girls, they're going to hate on me as teenagers already, I can imagine. They'll just throw this into the mix that you gave me 6 months of primary school there and then you moved me to another country. And anyway, I'm sure it'll be dramatic regardless of. So tell me, I'm quite interested in, and I know this is slightly off track, but I guess that you as the spouse in this decision-making process gets to have a relatively big say in the sorts of jobs that your wife was applying for. But how does that sort of process work, or how did it work for you guys? Did you have sort of like these are the hard no's as far as locations, or how did you sort of look at opportunities, or is it literally like there's an internal job board that you can see what's in the mix over the next 2 years, or how does that sort of work as far as choosing where you apply to go?
I mean, so there absolutely is that internal job board. So I think there are some kind of constraints that are set for you. You know, it depends what is being advertised at the time frame that you're looking at, and equally levels of seniority. You know, elsewhere is at a particular level within the Foreign Office. Therefore, some things are too senior, some things are too junior. So that starts to set a bit of a band of where you're looking. And then within the UK Foreign Service, and I think we're quite lucky because of the scale of it, that there is a pretty big degree of choice for officers looking at where to go. And then it's a question of kind of applying for it, you know, interviewing and seeing whether you're the best candidate. And in terms of us choosing, yeah, I mean, I think we looked at what was available at the time, and then balanced what we thought the quality of life was going to be like in the country. Things that, you know, would impact on kind of family life. So things like kind of air quality and pollution and things like that. Other areas about how easy or otherwise it might be for me to find work out there. So we weighed all of those things up, and then obviously all the kind of considerations. You know, what was good for Elsa's career, what was going to be interesting, and really kind of work for her as well. And then that helped us to kind of like circle around this, and Malaysia was just such a fantastic opportunity and ticking of so many of those boxes, I think. Although probably if you speak to my parents, it's still quite a long way from the UK, which I think is another one of those factors.
You're taking my grandchildren so far away.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to touch on the fact that your ability to work playing in the mix as far as decision making. Do you want to? We've interviewed a few people from Malaysia who have sort of touched on the situation as far as what it looks like to work with being a dependent trailing spouse. What's the sort of setup that you've experienced in the time, like in the last? So we're talking mid 2023 that you've arrived there. What did the sort of situation for someone in your like visa status look like for you to arrive and look for work or be able to sort of interact with work?
Well, I'm conscious that I'm very lucky because I think there is, and it's relatively recent, I think, but there is a mutual agreement in place between Malaysia and the UK now that married spouses and heterosexual married spouses are of serving officers are able to work out here. You have your kind of your work permit. So I've been very lucky, and I'm very conscious that that's not the case for people in different situations. And I think as well, it's work. I think one of the things that I've found, so I'm doing a couple of different things out here. I do some work for a strategic consultancy called Global Council, and I am the deputy director of a new think tank in the UK called the Future Governance Forum, which we formally launched last year. And in both of those cases, I think the ability to sort of work remotely and the way in which more people across the board have got used to that post-COVID, I think has enormously helped. But yeah, I was certainly, by virtue of moving out here as the married spouse of a diplomat, I think that made a real difference.
That's so interesting. It is, and I can imagine that there's a few people that are like, ugh, how unfair. Look, whatever. That's how it rolls. That's fabulous for you. And I'm always very stoked when people get to land themselves in interesting and good situations like that. So, like, as far as the ability to, I guess, navigate looking even what employment for you looked like in Malaysia, was it a matter of literally looking at stuff online and jobs boards and just putting it out there that you existed and leveraging networks and things? Like, what was your strategy?
So I guess my strategy was a bit different to that in a sense, I suppose, because I was, so going back a little bit when I mentioned about kind of how Ursula and I met in those first sort of few years where we were both civil servants. I left the civil service in 2012 and decided that I wanted to go and get more involved in sort of campaigning, activism and politics itself. And so I went to work for an NGO for a while, then got the job in Brussels working for a Labour politician. Then I, most recently, just before we came here, I was working for the Labour Party back in the UK. So I was a political advisor first to a UK politician called Annalisa Dodds. And then I was Labour's head of policy development, so overseeing a lot of the way in which the party develops its policy ahead of a general election. So that was my job immediately before coming out here, and that was not the sort of thing that I could have carried on doing remotely from thousands of miles away. But I wanted to stay connected to that world and to play my part however I could to maintain my sort of networks and to be able to see what I could do. So far more than looking at what was on offer in Malaysia, I was speaking to people back home, and to go back to the point about having a long run in, I was using that time to sort of speak to people and explore what my options might be for doing something that kept me connected back to the UK political scene, conscious that our time here, we always know, is time limited, because that's the way that it works with Elsa's job. So those were my sort of like criteria and strategy. And I guess on the one side of things with Global Council, this is me going back to a company that I'd worked for before. So I'd been there for 3 years between 2017 and 2020, and that I already had those kind of connections and was able to sort of talk to them about the prospect of doing what I do now, which is I'm a senior advisor for them, and I do that somewhere between 1 and 2 days a week, helping to advise their clients on UK politics, UK policy, and what a potential Labour government might look like. And then equally, over my kind of like time in the Labour Party, I got to know Nathan Yole, who is the founding executive director of the Future Governance Forum, and talk to him about the prospect of being able to kind of be involved in that. And that's 2 days a week. That's what I do. So kind of juggling those. So I lined things up before I came out here, but very much in that kind of facing back to the UK, working remotely for UK companies, or in the case of Global Council, an international company, but with a UK focus of my work, I suppose.
I think that is just such a fabulous strategy for people to consider, because I think quite often when people are looking at a relocation or moving or things, they're looking, like you said, forward facing to the place that they're going, and quite often are looking at, like, you know, the restrictions or the inability to do things in that place that you're moving to. I know that there's a nice grey area that I guess a lot of people live in a lot of countries, where if you are working remotely for an organization or company or whatever that's back in your place of residence or wherever you've got your passport, if you're not, you know, taking a potential job of someone that's living in the country that you're living in, then there's this nice sort of grey area where people can find themselves working remotely for companies. But I think that's probably how you've just articulated your strategy with that, especially because you had a nice long lead time, is being able to really explore what it can look like where you keep those ties and roots and, like you said, networks and things really strong and tight. Because especially, like, you know how yours rolls very explicitly in that, what is it, a 3-year posting? Is that what they
4 years.
4 years.
This one.
Yeah, so you can genuinely hand on heart say, I'm out of here from this physical location in 4 years. It might be to somewhere else, but being able to build that thing that it doesn't, if they'll let you stretch out quite broadly across the world, if you're coming back and touching base every couple of years, every 4 years or whatever, that is actually quite a strategic career thing as well that you can be staying in the loop with. I haven't sort of talked to people on the podcast that have done it as explicitly as that. It's quite often been that, you know, someone moves and the company they currently work with will make arrangements or let them work remotely, and there's a bit of flexibility about that. But yours has actually been quite strategic and actively done. Nice work, Adam. Well planned.
Thank you. I mean, it's worth saying though. I think it comes with trade-offs. I think it was a conscious choice, but I think it does mean, I think sometimes I've kind of felt if I had got a job working for a Malaysian firm or a kind of global firm with a base here or whatever, it would have been easier to slot into an automatic kind of social network of colleagues and friends to be going out. You trade off that bit of it, I live in this country and it's fantastic and really good, but I almost have to work that bit harder to go out and about and explore and feel part of Malaysia, because
to actually integrate.
Because the day job is thinking about the UK and sort of interacting with the UK, and obviously the other kind of inevitable trade-offs of like time zone and the impact that has on.
I was just about to ask, what does your day look like? Like, when's your login time look like for you to have some crossover hours with the UK?
So I've been getting used to it. This is all new to me. Like from the way I kind of described everything I've done before, up until now, every job I've done has been a 5 day a week job for one company, one organisation, mostly based in the time zone that I'm working in, even if it's been for kind of like the UK government or whoever. So there's been a lot of things to kind of get used to. I find that, so at the moment we're 7 hours ahead of the UK, and so my sort of 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. period fills up very quickly, because that's the ability to have meetings at 9 or 10 a.m. UK time. So that kind of overlaps a lot. I try and preserve 6 to 8 p.m. here free of any meetings, because that's dinner time, bath time and bedtime for the boys, and doing all that kind of stuff, and try to keep that safe. And then quite often an 8 p.m. meeting or a 9 p.m. meeting to maximise the kind of overlap with the UK. In which case, I think getting used to some of that rhythm, and therefore being thinking a bit more about, okay, well, when am I going to start working? If I'm finishing at 10 p.m, I don't want to have sort of sat down at my desk at 9 a.m. and suddenly kind of inadvertently arranged a 13-hour day for myself. So sort of adjusting to that has been a bit of a challenge, and I think I'm getting used to it. I'm speaking to you from a kind of co-working space, which has made a real big difference. I think getting out and about and setting some hours a bit more kind of rigidly there. But it does, the thing that it does help with is it now allows me to be more flexible during what traditionally would be the working day, for all kinds of other things. If that's kind of like supporting Elsa in her role, if that's the unexpected things that happen from that come up from having 2 5-year-olds, if it's various sort of like household related tasks or whatever, there is that kind of flexibility. But it's definitely, I've been doing it for 6 months now. I think I started in November working, and it's definitely taken me a while to get used to the rhythm of the week and how I want to set it, and expectations with colleagues back home as well.
And isn't it just so like confronting when you actually try and sort of do things in a different way, how like institutionalized we are to 9 to 5, and like 9 to 5 in the time zone. Like I sort of even just think about, obviously coming from Oz, where our breadth is very similar to that of the US, and so we've got some pretty major time zone differences in the same country. And just, it took me moving, so us being based in Singapore is the same time zone as Perth in Western Australia, and me still having a lot of client work on the east coast of Oz, just realizing it's been quite confronting to realize what an obnoxious East Coast Australian I was, that I was just setting these meetings that I assumed that the people in Western Australia should be getting up at 6 a.m. to do my 9 a.m. meetings. So it's been quite interesting, even just like being on the other end of it, as being able to sort of start thinking about, doing your work in a different way. And I must say, it's really, and I know it's a bit eye-rolly that I even sort of get excited listening to this, but what is just so, I think, transformational about, yes, COVID and the ways of people working differently, but that this has been almost a permission for so many families to rejig how they do family life. And I know with my husband is a very hands-on, he has, until we moved to Singapore, he's worked remotely his whole career. So he's always been very hands-on with our kids. And he did sort of the opposite and went back into like a 9 to 5 in the office once we got to Singapore. But I think it's just been such a fabulous thing for people being able to, like yourself, go and do work differently and involve family a lot more. And it's pushing back a bit on what that more traditional work looks like. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think with both of the companies that I do work for, they've been fantastic about it. I think on the global council side of it, they are, they have offices in Washington, London, Brussels, Doha, and Singapore. So actually, there's quite a organizational culture of vast kind of time zone differences, and I think an understanding there. And with the Future Governance Forum, I think because we're brand new, and I was in there from the start, we've built certain kind of team meetings very kindly kind of around my availability. And actually sometimes this sounds like one of those awful kind of job interview things where you try to find a pretend weakness, but I think a lot of the time it's been me putting the pressure on myself. As you say, you internalize that 9 to 5 thing. And it's like, oh god, it's 11 a.m. and I haven't started working yet, and trying to remind yourself that's because you've got another kind of 9 hours worth of work looking ahead of you from 11 a.m. even. But it does take a bit of adjusting to give yourself a bit of a break, I think.
And you've got to do things like force yourself to, book classes at the gym, or go and set things up with, okay, I go for a walk with someone on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and it's a different person on each day or whatever, but forcing things into the calendar when it's not your work time. That is your like 5 p.m. till 9 p.m. in your other world of work. You just do it on the other end of the day. Like it's definitely an adjustment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's even more the case. I mean, as you'll know, being in Singapore, the heat and the climate here sort of dictates doing that anyway, I think. So one of the things outside of work, but linked to it, has been establishing a sort of an exercise regime and a kind of physical health regime where you just realize it's very easy to,
get
in the air,
not do anything.
Exactly. Yeah. To get in the air conditioned car, to go from the air conditioned house to the air conditioned mall or office or wherever. And so really carving out that, like, okay, I'm going to I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go for a walk. And if I'm going to do that, I need to have done that pre 9 a.m. before the thermometer kind of ticks up past 35, and it all starts to get a bit kind of hot and sticky to do that.
Oh gosh, I'm literally not going to know myself when I go back to Oz, where yes, it's hot where we live. Like we get a good couple of weeks over 40 degrees every year, but it's dry as a chip. Like I'm just not going to know myself without the humidity here. I'm interested to sort of hear, like obviously you're still nutting out this like what the week looks like and putting things in, like the things that need to fill the cup, like the exercise and those sorts of things. But you've touched on already one of the things that is problematic about being all very well organized and having your work stuff set up with a very sort of home looking direction. What have you done, if anything, to sort of start or attempt, or like to actually attempt to integrate or to build network in KL and to meet people? Or are you a little introvert that's quite happy living in your your new little remote work world?
No, I'm absolutely not. I'm an extrovert, and I think that's been a challenge. I think I've missed an office and colleagues. It's why I've been coming into this co-working space for about 4 weeks now, and that's been like a real game changer for me. Not necessarily even having lots of conversations with people, but just being
Seeing
around people more. Yeah, exactly. So that's huge for me. So then I think in some ways, again, it's quite kind of lucky that certain kinds of ready-made social circles exist. So I think parents at the school has been a really, really big thing. You meet other parents at the school. It's an international school that our kids go to. So there's quite a lot of Malaysian parents there, but there's also people from Australia, Germany, the US, from the UK, and getting to meet parents. And then obviously you've automatically got that thing in common where you've got a 4 or 5 year old and they're at the same school. So that's been a kind of huge source, and it's been really nice. And, organising play dates for the boys and attending all of the birthday parties that seem to come up. So that's been one part of it. I think
my God,
another
the amount of money that I spend on birthday presents. Holy hat.
Yes. Yeah.
It's real.
But that's the struggle is real. But it's been like that's been one thing. The other is that obviously I have those kind of I work for those two companies, but then I have this sort of quasi formal role as Elsa's husband, and with her as the High Commissioner, that does involve accompanying her to lots of things as well. And that can be, I find that's a really nice way, particularly of kind of meeting more Malaysian people, often, and more diplomatic people from the kind of diplomatic community, and getting to meet a lot of people there. And we're incredibly fortunate in the things that we get invited to, and we get to kind of go along to. It's different, undeniably, because you're there. She has a very formal role. I have to sort of make sure that I'm conscious of that. When we're going to these things, and it's work for her a lot of the time. But through those, you get to kind of meet people that you really genuinely kind of make a connection with. And I think that's been really nice. But it's definitely work in progress, I think, to get out there. And it was more acute in Brussels because of what I was saying earlier, I think, about that being such a magnet for so many people who are passing through, even if passing through is sort of 3 or 4 years. Here, I think it's a nicer mix of people who are in the same position, people who are expats, but they've come here and they've settled, they've fallen in love with the country, and they love it here, and they've been here for 10, 20 years, and then Malaysians themselves. And I am really keen to make the most of our time here and feel like when we come back that you've really sort of immersed yourself in the culture, got to know people, got to understand what the country's like, and get underneath it all. And one of the things that's kind of helped with that is Elsa has to and wants to travel around Malaysia itself, not just be in Kuala Lumpur, but get out and about. And certainly early on, before I was working and before the boys had started school as well, we were able to sort of combine
tag
some of
along.
those things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she would have a kind of work commitment on like a Friday or something, and then we could come and join her, and then like at sort of like private expense, then stay on for the rest of the weekend in a hotel or something and see. We've got to go to both Sabah and Sarawak in Borneo, which has been fantastic. And then we've done kind of family holidays here. So we were on the east coast of Malaysia a couple of weeks ago. We went up to Langkawi back in October. So getting to really kind of travel around and explore Malaysia itself, this kind of fantastic country with all the variety that it has as well.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm so pleased to hear. It's like I think that it's such a fascinating, regardless of sort of the industry or what, or the company or whatever that the working spouse of these situations is doing. I just love sort of hearing the stuff that people get to do, as far as like it's such a treat to get to go and do these things as well. So I'm always really like excited to hear people like yourselves that are like going to wring every last drop of experience out of your time there, especially when you know that it has a finite amount of time to it. I think that's such a great attitude to have towards it.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, and it's like, as I said before, like I'm not Pollyanna-ish about it all, because there are certainly trade-offs that are kind of involved in all of that. As being married to someone in the Foreign Office, you're conscious that this is going to kind of keep happening, these kind of moves overseas, and on the one hand, they make for this kind of incredible adventure, but on the other hand, it interrupts your own career. It kind of pulls you out and about, and I think you're kind of like conscious of the kind of bittersweet nature of that. I suppose sometimes that can be quite challenging, but you're also like, I find I quite like how it sort of sets you a new set of kind of parameters. You're like, okay, we're going to live here now, so that means these are the things that I'm looking to do. How do I kind of make the most of that? And then I think it's that thing of kind of projecting forward to the point at which you come back from it, and you look backwards on it and think, did I make the most of the time out there? Did I kind of really get the most from it? And I think, as cliche as it is, doing it with children this time around like amplifies that, because you're just like, what are they going to think? Our sons were 4.5 when we moved here, so by the time we moved back, they will have spent half their life in Malaysia, and at that point, the half that is much more kind of formative in terms of memories and the things that they're going to remember, this will be the sort of the chunk of their childhood that they remember kind of most significantly. So are we making the most of it for them? Are we making sure that they're kind of like getting everything out of it as well?
That's so funny. I've got some Irish friends that live here, and they I think they've got 2 kids, and I'm pretty sure they were both born in Ireland, but the little one was very little when they arrived, and people will say, oh, like, where are you from? And he's like, I'm Singaporean. He's like this pasty little Irish boy. Like, because he went to daycare and then preschool and stuff, he can speak Mandarin, and it's hilarious, like the Mandarin with a little Irish accent. Like it's so funny that for a lot of these expat kids that I find it fascinating that there's almost this like this, particularly in the international school scene, that there's sort of almost fixation on where you're from, as in where is your passport from, when for a lot of these kids, they say, oh, I'm American, but they were born in Singapore and have lived their whole life here, have never lived in the country of where their passport is from. And it's just such a fascinating sort of thing when it comes to like identity and things. And I've actually interviewed a few people on the podcast that were expat kids themselves, that third culture kids themselves. And it's so interesting listening to them and their mindset on this whole experience, because, they've lived it themselves. And so it's such a different experience for them doing it with their kids. To those, like I grew up in a town of 2,000 people. Like I definitely was not an expat kid.
No, and I think that's the thing. I mean, my whole childhood was in the same town, where my parents still live now. and I loved it. It was fantastic. And there are times where you think, I think our sons they're kind of really enjoying it and getting into it now, but there was definitely, they held on to London being where they're from and what they know and all the rest of it much more strongly than I was probably expecting them to, if I'm honest. I think there was just much more of like, when are we going back to London? This isn't a holiday, right? Okay, trying to kind of get their heads around all of that. And it's one of those things where you're like, I can't, you can kind of empathize as a parent an awful lot, be like, I don't know, I wasn't a child of parents who kind of like traveled overseas for work or anything like that. So there's a limit to how much you kind of, what they're kind of going through, I suppose.
Also, I feel like I'm one of those awful parents that like, oh, you'll be right. This is an amazing experience. Why aren't you just enjoying this? Like, don't you realize how lucky you are? Like, no, you've just taken me out of my nice tiny little town with my nice small school where everything was all very small and things, and you've plonked me in a global city. And I'm sort of like, don't you realize how amazing this is? And I sort of forget that.
Yeah.
I also underestimate how much they're taking on.
Well, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. And I think an awful lot of people said to us in advance with really, really good intentions, like a really kind of like well-meaning thing, but we heard an awful lot, our kids are really adaptable. They're really, really adaptable. Don't worry about it. Kids at that age, they're really adaptable. And you're like, no, they are up to a point, but it's a big thing that you're asking of them. And it kind of throws it a bit. And I think it's funny you say about the the things that you try and kind of say to them to get them over moments where they're having a bit of a wobble. And it just made me really conscious. They've basically got no concept of like rarity value because they're experiencing things, or everything they're experiencing pretty much is kind of for the first time. So we had a kind of memorable moment where we were in Borneo and we went to the orangutan sanctuary and the rainforest centre, and the guide kind of stopped us and said, look up there. And in the tree was a mother and baby orangutan, tiny little, incredibly cute orangutan. And they were trying to get across to us, the guide was trying to get across to us just how rare this was, that you could get to spot that. And my son was just saying, I want to go back to the car. And you're just like, no, you will never see this again in your life. And it's the first time I've seen one of these, but equally a lot of other things are for the first time. And I have no concept of how regularly I'll get to see these things again.
Yeah. And that's such a beautiful example of it. We've had that couple of times where it's been me more losing my cool at the girls. So mine are a bit older than yours. Mine are 10 and 8. And them being, my 10-year-old in particular, like, oh, okay, we're going so-and-so somewhere for the long weekend. How many stars is the hotel? I'm like, I beg your pardon? Like, one, how do you even know what that means? And two, you're getting to go on this holiday and rah, rah, rah. And I would rant at them. And then I'd have to pull myself up and say exactly that. These kids have spent the last 2 years so far getting to go to these incredible places and staying in hotels of various stars. But they're kids and they don't realize that there's half a population of whole countries that don't have passports, let alone getting to go on planes every month and getting another stamp in your passport. And so us readjusting, my husband hadn't been on a plane until he'd finished high school, before, like just how different their life is to us, and us pushing our excitement, but also acknowledging our privilege that we get to do this, pushing that onto the kids when they're like, well, this is what we do every holiday. It's like, of course we're going somewhere where we get a new stamp in the passport. Like, it's a really interesting thing to sort of try and get your head around as the parent, and to be empathetic to them with how they're experiencing it as well. Yeah, it's really, but seeing the baby orangutan, that's hilarious.
Yeah, he was not interested at all.
Or I find that as well with the kids. I'm like, okay, cool, like get your runners on. We're going to go and explore this. And they're like, we just want to watch TV. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay, I have one little question left to ask. Because you had such a lead, like a big lead time this time, do you think there's anything that you did differently that you didn't do when there's been shorter amounts of time sort of with the moves and things, like as far as, well, I guess learnings or advice or things, or you can actually just flip that if that's not actually so much the case. Like, is there things that you wish you'd done differently with this most recent relocation?
I think it's hard to tell, because I think it's very, like, two factors make this move very different to anyone that we've done before as well. The first is that this time round, Elsa is the High Commissioner, and that is just of a different category to having worked in different Foreign Office roles before, because, you know, the residence that we live in, which is incredibly an incredible privilege to live in, but it is quasi public property. It's also the place where the embassy kind of hosts events and all of these kind of things happen. She is a more public, prominent figure on the local scene, all of those kind of things. So that's been a big adjustment, and I think we both were sort of preparing for that as much as we can. Like, as you can imagine, like, the Foreign Office does training for those people who are off to be ambassadors for the first time. It also brilliantly, in the UK at least, has a Spouses and Families Association, which does training if you're going to be the partner of an ambassador going out somewhere for the first time. But I think even, and we both took advantage of those kind of options and opportunities to do that. But even so, I think it's probably a bigger adjustment than we thought. And then the second thing that's different this time around is doing it with kids, you know, as we've just been talking about. And I think whether we could maybe have, we held off because, you know, as you were saying, long lead-in time, about 15 months of knowing. We sort of picked our moment to tell the boys we're going to be moving to Malaysia, we're going to kind of be moving overseas, and started trying to lay that groundwork with them. I guess it's a bit of an open question of, could we done that a little bit earlier? Maybe. I'm not really sure, because of the age they were, trying to get that kind of concept into their heads. I'm not sure. I think probably my bigger reflection and sort of bit of advice, if that's what it is for anyone, is that even with that long run-in time, just being like as kind to yourself and going as easy as yourself as possible when you arrive is really important, because it's just, it's almost a kind of false thing that you think, you know, we've been thinking about this for so long, we've known about it for such a long time, and we had done various bits that you kind of like needed to do, but that culture shock happens anyway. That, you know, there is just that thing, as I'm sure like everybody you've interviewed and everybody who kind of like listens along and has done this as well will kind of like sympathize with, is just like, you know, what do people say are some of the most stressful things to do? Move country, move house, start a new job. And the structure of this is that you do all of those things simultaneously
At once. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just thinking like being as kind as you possibly can be to yourself and not sort of berating yourself, which I definitely did. We both did, and of that thing of just like, oh, why aren't we more established yet, getting this thing right yet? Why isn't the sort of like routine there, or whatever the sort of questions might be? Is it's just like, it takes a while. We're still bedding in at the moment, kind of 9 months on, you know, we're still settling in, working out how things work in this city and this culture, and with all of the kind of things that have changed.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's fabulous advice. Beautiful thing to wrap it up on, Adam. That's awesome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
No, I'm really pleased, and it's just, like I said, I love getting to do these interviews and getting to hear about people's experiences, because while there's themes that run through them, like, it's just everyone's experience with this is just so different as well. It's crazy. It's been such a treat. So thank you very much for sharing your version of events.
Oh, pleasure, and thank you too.